Now let me just transition quickly, and I want to get to your questions. I have had the opportunity, as your representative of the United States Congress, to visit the State of Israel on 2 occasions. I was there in 2005, and I was there in 2011. And to have the sense in both cases, and I was there in August of both of those years, the difficulty of the geography, the challenges the State of Israel faces with regard to its security and its obligation to defend itself, traveled throughout the state. From the furthest point south to the Golan Heights to the north, stood on the Golan Heights and could see how close Lebanon and Syria are to Israel. You could almost reach out and touch it, that close. When I was there in 2005, in August of 2005, Benjamin Netanyahu was, I believe, the finance minister. And he may have been at that point in time, I think he was running for prime minister. And he was running Ariel Sharon. I met with Ariel Sharon. I met with Bibi Netanyahu. Netanyahu was running against, might have been Ehud Olmert. Was he the mayor of Jerusalem? I think he was running for prime minister at the time. And I was listening intently to Netanyahu give this speech about the challenges that Israel has in trying to broker a peace which Israel desperately wants. But the danger of, at the bargaining table, giving away land for peace. He was opposed at the time. He said it's been tried in the past and it hasn't worked. He talked about Hebron and the different locations that had been given away to achieve peace, and peace was not forthcoming. And at the time that I was there in August of 2005, the withdrawal from Gaza was going on at that moment, August of 2005. It was a very difficult time for the Israelis, for the Jews. And driving through the streets of Israel, through the streets of Jerusalem, there were cars with orange ribbons on the antenna. They were individuals who were opposed to the withdrawal. And that was, frankly, as I could tell, most of the population. But they were insistent, the government was insistent they were going forward. The reason I tell you that story, because Netanyahu was saying at the time, can't trade land for peace, it hasn't worked. When I went back 6 years later in August of 2011, 4 or 5 days before Kathy and I arrived, the missiles from Gaza started landing in the south of Israel, around Beersheba. Say that right? Beersheba. And one of the first morning we arrived, we had the opportunity to listen to a mother from that region, from the south of Israel, who came to meet us in Jerusalem and speak to a group of assembled members of Congress about, and she didn't realize when the arrangement was made for her to come talk to us, that there would be missiles raining down on her hometown. She had one son. She explained to us how the son was in a safe room in the house. She explained to us how the stress on her 11 or 12-year-old son, what it was doing to his health, his physical health, interrupting his education, how disruptive. When she started the speech, she put her cell phone down on the podium and she apologized, and she said, I have to keep it because my son's home alone in the safe room, and I wanted to come here to talk to you. And she had tears basically through most of her talk. And I just tell you that so I want you to understand that I have been there, that I do my best to understand the challenges that Israel faces. And then what do I do with that knowledge, with those experiences that you know much better than I? I do my best to be a good representative for you on the floor of the House. I sponsor bills which are sponsored by Democrats and Republicans in the House that have gone to the President for signature to address the issue of the threat of Iran, specifically the Iran Threat Reduction and Syria Human Rights Act of 2012. I was a co-sponsor, early co-sponsor of that bill. But that was co-sponsored, and this is good, by Democrats and Republicans, and was signed by the President. There were other bills that I co-sponsored with fewer sponsors on the bill. One that probably is one of the more aggressive bills filed in the House to direct the administration and the Secretary of State to deal with the threat of a nuclear Iran. And that one would require the Secretary of State to file a report with the United States Congress on how to eliminate the threat of a nuclear Iran, and specifically how to deal with Iran's involvement and impact in the Western Hemisphere, in South and Central America. And then finally, I'll just mention one more issue, one more bill that I sponsored, and then we'll get to questions. You may have seen, I appeared on the Greta Van Susteren show about 10 days, 2 weeks ago. I sponsored a bill. It was right after the incident in Cairo, Egypt, and Benghazi, Libya. The next day, I had reached out to a number of Jewish constituents to talk to them and try to get from them their perspective on what was unfolding in the Middle East. And we had a good conversation. Out of that conversation were many recommendations. One of the recommendations from one of my constituents was that I take the lead in the House of Representatives on an issue that nobody was talking about and nobody was taking the lead on, which was to ask the United Nations to prohibit President Ahmadinejad from appearing before the United Nations on Yom Kippur, one of the highest Jewish holidays. So I filed the bill. We had as many co-sponsors as we could get. It was right around the time that Congress was coming out of session. But I wanted to, on your behalf, send that very clear and serious and significant message to the House and through the House to the country and to the United Nations that the continual invitations to the head of that state aren't acceptable. The stage and the podium on the Jewish holiday, the Day of Atonement, I think it's the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, should have been revoked. And I think that most Americans, and I think that most Bucks Counties agree with me on that, but we need a Congress that's willing to act with a unified voice in support of the State of Israel and that significant friendship and relationship that we have. But we also need an administration that's willing to stand up for the same things. And I'll just end as I started. There's an election in 3 weeks from Tuesday, and that's, as the President likes to say, that's what elections are about. They're about choices. And in this election, whether it's the race for the United States Congress or the race for the President of the United States, the choices are pretty clear. And I know that my constituents in Bucks County, in eastern Montgomery County,